all political systems are based on various models which have been invariable since the history of civilization began, which were once there were developed nations that had armies and powers and so on, they tended to expand and colonize other regions and other places with the kind of ruthless efficiency that somebody like the Roman Empire, something like the Roman Empire, actually achieved. The Roman Empire was far more tolerant, paradoxically, in so-called pagan times when the gods were worshipped and so on, and became much more intolerant of others, of other creeds and so on, in the Christian areas. As things developed, the Romans became more and more intolerant of others, but empires have a lifespan, and it's almost a logical progression from the rise of an empire to its reaching an apex and finally starting to slide down into decadence. So if we examine the motivations that are behind these so-called civilizations, we find that out of fear, civilizations have been able, so-called civilizations have been able to dominate one another. If it was a religious thing, when the church, in this case the Roman Catholic Church, managed to become extremely powerful, they maintained their power by suggesting that out of the church there was no salvation, and that one couldn't in any way, shape or form attain any kind of so-called salvation without going through an intermediary, which gave the church a lot of power. And the principle seems to always be the same, even in this modern age, that power seems to be the main motivation behind everything. Power. How to be in power, how to maintain power. So wealth and all these, the pursuit of wealth, pales in comparison to the sheer desire for power of one kind or another and the maintenance of said power. So what politically one is witnessing is a clash of different ideologies, in a sense trying to impose their own mores and their own way of life one upon the other, to some extent. I hear a lot of people speaking negatively of the Chinese, but if one is pragmatic, the Chinese have the numbers in going for them. Their numbers are far greater than any Occidental civilization. Their conquest has been because the West in general, the West in the broad sense of the term, attempted to have everything made in a cheaper fashion in China and contributed to a development of this tremendous commercial potential. It is a fact that as things are more expensive here than elsewhere, when China becomes too expensive, its place in that service industry is taken by other workforces which charge less and less, where labor is less costly. The middle classes or the lower classes in their upward mobility have paradoxically priced themselves out of certain things, and with the result that other people who were ready to work for less have taken over. So it becomes a game between these competing systems as to who is going to dominate the other, with the excuse of various ideologies. America promotes their idea of so-called democracy and would like to, if need be by force of arms, at least by some sort of coercion, to force other people to endorse their own system and their own values. Rising the so-called third world and the ex-colonial countries of Africa and places like that, which were carved out of old colonial places with complete disregard to tribes border, ethnicities, and all these things. The difficulties of the modern age with constant warfare and different groups and different ideologies fighting each other is the movement of displaced populations, which are trying to survive desperately, and people's homes and crops and goods and cattle and so on are destroyed or stolen or the rest of it. And desperate people try to find a better life. It's all this struggle. You have a war now, what turns out in actual fact, in the name of various ideology, there's one hostile country which for its own ideas invades another country and imposes terrific distress on those populations and destruction and the rest of it. But their own downfall is a complete disorder in their inability to conduct warfare in a rational fashion, so that everything is done, and one wonders how this can be done, and everybody rejoices and says, oh, now we can test this and that system, because those guys were incapable of conducting an operation which would have achieved what they wanted to do in the first place, which would have been potentially quite disastrous if the dominoes had fallen in the first week of the present situation in the Ukraine, for instance. But when you look at the whole picture, what is the end game in all these investments. Now, some narrow-minded politicians have this demagogic view that they can argue that far too many funds are being expended in these matters to do this and that. But the military-industrial complex has a great victory in its in having been able to demonstrate the efficiency of their weapons of mass destruction and so on, used in the name of defense, but generating fantastic orders and discrediting the opposite parties and creating this real economic struggles between different systems that one is efficient, the other is totally inefficient, due to almost a racial sort of a strange configuration, which would be comical if it wasn't so tragic. You know, and how many lives are being lost in this dogged fashion attempt to conduct things in such a brutish fashion.